Hey, what's up, guys? I'm away from home on vacation right now, but I decided I wanted to make a quick video about why your accent is actually helpful rather than harmful. Because I see a lot of people talking about how they want to learn to speak like a native speaker, or they want to be mistaken for native speakers. And this is something that I also thought about a lot when I first started learning Spanish, the first language that I learned. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So I just wanted to make a brief video to address that. The reason this came up, this idea for this video, is because on the way driving up north this weekend, I read the book Becoming Fluent. I didn't read the whole thing, but I'm quite old. I'm probably about halfway through. And there's a lot of really valuable insights in this book. The subtitle of this book is How Cognitive Science Can Help Adults Learn a Foreign Language. And there was a passage in here that I just want to read to you really quick because it has to do with this topic of how your accent can actually be beneficial. So there's two authors of this book, Richard Roberts and Roger Kreutz. I don't know how to say that. But anyways, they say, in this book, we make the claim that it is important for foreign language learners to start very early on establishing their own unique identity in the foreign language. After all, you're not just trying to communicate in a foreign language, you're trying to express yourself in that language, which is not the same thing at all. Even when students communicate adequately in a foreign language, they often become frustrated when they're unable to use the language to reflect their individuality, personality, or character. Learning new vocabulary words, grammatical structures, and pragmatic devices that are relevant to you will make it easier for you to speak in the new language and will help you establish an identity in that language. Getting rid of your accent will not help you do any of this, and in fact, it may have quite the opposite effect. Accents, as one indicator of background and personal history, are a useful, necessary, and appropriate part of one's speech pattern. And I just want to interject right here. Why are you trying to be mistaken for a native speaker? You're not a native speaker, right? So essentially, if that's your goal, then you're trying to lie to people who you're speaking to in your foreign language. You're trying to deceive them. You're trying to trick them, right? There's another book that you should be reading. It's by Sam Harris, and the book is called Lying. It's actually a really good book. Anyways, as I was saying, accents are one indicator of background and personal history. As one indicator of background and personal history are useful, necessary, and appropriate part of one's speech pattern. We argue, therefore, that not only is it a waste of time and energy to get rid of your accent, it's actually counterproductive. We recommend instead that you embrace your accent. Show it off. By considering your accent an asset as opposed to a liability, you will have more incentive to speak the language, which will in turn improve your level of fluency and your confidence. You can't master the phonology of a language if you're learning that language as an adult, okay? You will never speak like a native speaker, okay? You may get close, okay? I'll give you that. There are some people that do get close, all right? But even if you know someone who's learned a language as an adult and they get really, really good, there's always something that gives them away as being a non-native speaker. All right, so first of all, it's not a realistic goal. Second of all, you're just wasting your time trying to reach that level of perfection when in reality there's other aspects of the language that you should be trying to improve in, like increasing your fluency, increasing your knowledge of the pragmatics or your social understanding of the language. If you're afraid of having an accent and that causes you to not want to speak and not want to practice, that's going to really hinder your progressing in other areas of the language. Clearly, if your speech is so heavily accented that you are unintelligible, or if your accent is so unusual that others focus not on what you say, but on how you say it, then you will need to work on improving your accent. I agree. If you're not being understood, you should be trying to improve your accent. That's just common sense. Nothing is more frustrating than having to repeat a phrase or word over and over, only to have the native speaker, when he finally does understand what you're saying or trying to say, repeat it back to you in a way that sounds exactly the same. I do know that feeling. When this happens, of course, you should pay attention to the subtle differences in pronunciation, stress, vowel length, or any other critical features that are important for your target language. But being able to articulate the sounds of the target language exactly like a native speaker is perhaps the most difficult part of learning a foreign language as an adult. And I would say that it's not only the most difficult aspect, it's just basically impossible. Rather than spend an inordinate amount of time fighting against your accent, it is much better to capitalize on your advanced metacognitive skills. And metacognitive skills is something they talk a lot about in this book. It's how cognitive science can help. Metacognitive skills are just being able to think about your thinking and being able to think about how you learn languages. Okay. So rather than spend an inordinate amount of time fighting against your accent, it is much better to capitalize on your advanced metacognitive skills to analyze where and how it interferes with intelligibility. Then find ways to work around these problems given the accent you already have. For example, you could learn another word that expresses the same idea, but which you can more easily pronounce. There is no reason why you can't choose words that fit comfortably into the way you speak. Or you can find a way to prime the listener for what you mean to say by providing more context. In Korean, for example, when Richard is one of the authors of the book. In Korean, for example, when Richard says the word for translate, it often ends up sounding like the word for violence and vice versa. But when he says translator, it immediately becomes clear what he means because there is no such word as violencer. Over time, Richard may get better at distinguishing between violence and translation, but until then, he can at least minimize the likelihood that he will be misunderstood. I want to talk a little bit about that. What they just recommended there is a short-term solution, right? Because even though this video is about why your accent can be helpful, if you're trying to say translate and it sounds like you're saying violent instead, that's a catastrophic error, and that's something that you actually need to learn how to pronounce correctly. So you want to improve your accent, okay? But if you're in the very beginning stages of learning the language and you just can't pronounce that sound yet, then this is a good workaround short term. You do want to eventually be able to at least make the distinction between those two words. Okay, it goes on. There is, in fact, a word to describe foreign language learners who speak with an accent and choose for themselves the words, phrases, and pragmatic devices through which they express their own unique personality, even though this leaves their speech somewhat foreign-sounding. The word is charming. And I like that ending to the section in the book, because this might not be the best example, but for whatever reason, every time I think about speaking with an accent in my foreign languages, I think of That 70s Show, and the character I think of is Fez. He's like my favorite character in the show, and he's hilarious, and I just cannot imagine him just being as funny of a character if he spoke like a native speaker of English. His accent is part of what makes him him. And one of the main things that I think they kind of briefly touched on it, but one of the main things that I like about having an accent is we don't think about this as being really valuable, but it is, and your accent advertises you as a learner of that language. Okay, which means, well, in some situations that might be bad, but generally speaking, I find that people are willing to help those who are learning their language, and if they can tell you have an accent, they might be more willing to speak slower. They might be more willing to help you with vocabulary words that are on the tip of your tongue, or just vocabulary words that you don't know, and they're going to be more understanding if you accidentally misuse an idiom, or if you say something that doesn't make sense, or if you say something that's offensive in their language, right? If they think you're a native speaker, if you have successfully tricked them into thinking that you're a native speaker, and you say something that is culturally offensive, insensitive, then you have no excuse, right? Because you haven't allowed your accents to tell the truth about who you are. So that's just something to think about. I'm going to turn off the video now and enjoy the rest of my vacation out here on the farm. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in my live stream this Friday.